The way we look at ability and disability in our organization is it's not binary, it's not a switch, it's not an identity, it's task-based. We will all age into disability. Normality just becomes how the majority view things. Symptoms of ADHD, and you're like, that's a feature set. Those aren't bugs, those are features. You're using the wrong app. If you designed a knife for a robot, it wouldn't look like the linear knife that we have today. In the civilian world, we fall prey to buzzwords. But generally, we're all living the riddle of the Sphinx.
That is Douglas Katz, West Point graduate, disabled Army veteran, and lifelong inventor, redesigning tools for real life. Douglas's journey is an adaptive innovation and is driven at a personal level. After a successful early military career and an awakening moment in corporate America, Douglas took the path of entrepreneurship, working with a team of professionals over 50 to develop products that adapt to people's changing abilities over time. His flagship invention, the NULU Knife, reimagines the kitchen knife and has enabled many with physical disabilities to reinvigorate their love for cooking. My name is Peter Marcus Bach, and this is the Grand Challenges Podcast, a show about inspiring individuals who are stepping up to tackle the global challenges that our world is facing in their own unique ways. We reflect on the many out-of-the-box ways our guests have navigated the complexity and intricacies of our environment at the cutting edges of science, engineering, technology, and design. On today's show, Douglas and I dive into his journey of 3 acts and discuss a much-needed reframing of physical and mental disabilities and various ways in which design should adapt to the changes in human capability over the course of their lifespan. Douglas also shares honest and personal insights into how he has adapted his lifestyle to cope with changes in the body and mind, how better tools and AI are strengthening his unique feature sets, and how you can adopt the same thinking in your own life's journey. Visit tgcpodcast.show for detailed information and show notes on this episode. Thank you for joining us today, and please enjoy the show. Welcome to the show, Douglas.
Thank you, Peter. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
I like the preparatory mustache.
I got it. There's a whole story behind that too, but that's good.
Yeah. No, but I'm very excited for what we're going to discuss today. I think it's a very important topic and also needs a bit of reframing in a world that we're living in today, which is, I guess, highly diverse and also just, I think, very polarized as well. So looking forward to revealing to the listeners as we go what we're going to be discussing.
Sure.
But when we were thinking about what to talk about at the start, I realized that there's one topic that I think just naturally connects to a trend that has been showing up on the podcast episodes, which is martial arts. And we've had Taekwondo on the show. We've had Kung Fu as well, but you're into Aikido.
I am. I was brought into it by a friend of mine after searching what my next hobby was going to be. I'm an incurable hobbyist. And I had done some of the more kinetic stuff just through the military. And I was looking for something a little bit more of a vibe, something that had a different feel to it. And it's been, for me, it's actually shaped a lot of other things in more ways than I expected.
I mean, I did Taekwondo as a child. And
okay.
It was more like learning self-defense, I guess self-discipline as well.
Yes.
And I know that it's a type of martial arts where you work with both your feet and your arms. From what I understand, Aikido is more hand-based. Am I right?
Aikido it's purely defensive in the first kind of design difference or differentiation. And it's very hard to describe because a lot of it does come from the lineage of the other. Like, you've only got 2 arms and 2 legs, right? So realistically, they're very similar, but there's no striking but for giving the person learning the technique or learning how to get in the right position for the technique. There's no offensive movement in it, which is actually a drawback in some ways because it's harder to learn because you're not afraid of getting punched in the face the way you are in other martial arts. But it's a lot of submission, throwing, as I understand it, and I've heard all these different things. It was based on Aikijitsu, and Aikijitsu was based in the Bushido and samurai culture of, what do you do if you're disarmed as a samurai? And a lot of it is disarming and being able to get in a position where then you can renew. And a lot of it is the movements And the way that you orient your hands and stuff is as if you were holding a sword. So there's a lot of work with weapons, but not in an offensive way. It's a very interesting path, and a lot of it tends to be very interspersed with Zen as well. So you'll meet people who are the high rank or who have achieved Shihan, who are also Zen masters. And that's something for me that's been another draw as I've sort of searched the spiritual wasteland to find what guides me.
Interesting. So, I mean, the way I read it, it's like you're being defensive, but I guess the offense through defense would come in the form of maybe destabilizing your opponents.
Absolutely.
Yes. Fending off their strikes and allowing them to lose balance as a result of it and perhaps give up eventually.
Right. Well, and it's interesting. So when I moved, I started training under a different sensei, and the technique is very similar, but the sensei I'm training under now there is more of a direct, there is sometimes a more offensive feel in a way to make people react to where they lose their balance. And it's just a different take on it, which has been interesting, because I think with martial arts, the more people that you can train under, the better, because everybody's different. How things click with you is different. How your body type is different. And I think sometimes when you go ultra deep dive into a very, very rigid technique, it limits you in maybe figuring out what works better for your individual thinking, body type, all that kind of stuff.
I guess through that you learn how to personalize the art for yourself. And
absolutely.
What works best. Yeah. And I guess you mentioned the spiritual side of it, related to Zen a lot. It is also a journey inwards, through self-discipline, but also that enlightenment as a result of the movement, as a result of, I guess, training your presence to observe when you're defending, because I think that takes a lot more effort than just charging in.
That's frankly for me, and there's always the debate out there, aside from the Steven Seagal stuff, of the value of Aikido. And, I vacillated on it. I think that when done correctly, it is exceptionally effective. The hard part is it's so nuanced that, I've done some Krav Maga, that you can walk in and leave at the end of a session with practical self-defense. Aikido isn't that way. And, just when you figure it out, your body changes. So then you have to figure out what works. And for me, that's the gift part of it, right? I think between, having wrestled a long time and done army close quarters combat and done a little bit of Krav Maga, that is enough for me. If something happened, I could defend myself because that's what's going to kick in. I think for me, it's the constant struggle. And in the Japanese martial arts, there's a term called shuyo, and it's your struggle. And I do believe that struggle in life builds the character, builds the innovation, builds all of that. So I love that. I will walk on the mat and have a terrible day and love it and feel joy in failure. And that was me last weekend. I had a terrible training session, but I walked feeling very fulfilled because it's both humbling and mind-opening of okay, what did I do today that was different, that I had such a terrible training session? And I think that's a gift. I think something that you can never solve is what makes life fun.
That's very true. But I guess it also builds that resilience for then doing the real innovation out in the outside world and building things that can change lives as well.
It does. And I think sometimes taking a time away. So as I've looked at where that connection was and getting back on the mat and what that has reinvigorated and the synapses that has reconnected, you realize how important some of those things are to be able to be in a completely different environment than maybe what you do, but draw a through line to it to then be able to draw from that in those other situations. So I've done some writing on it. I just recently wrote an article about getting back on the mat and what that's done in my entrepreneurial life, because I think I think it's important. I think it's undervalued the degree that or something else can lend value to your other endeavors.
No, definitely. And I think everyone should have that kind of, personal discovery activity that is quite separate from the work that they do. And in your case, to help your entrepreneurship, that is a story and a journey in itself that I definitely want to get into.
Thank you.
And we will get back to Aikido because that will play a theme later on as well. But you already mentioned you were in the military. And actually, you like to describe your life in 3 acts, and probably that's the best way we can tell that story. And listeners, stay tuned for Act 3 because that's where I think we'll get most of the gems. But it wouldn't have happened without a lot of the struggles and journeys that you've had in the first 2 acts. So maybe, tell me, starting in Act 1, this is really what you describe as your military career.
Sure. Well, you know what? I was the first to enter the military out of my family. My grandfather actually, you look back at World War II and it was a whole militarized society at the time. So he was actually a plumber who did work on submarines in Hawaii. So he had a very visceral connection to the military. Like he was very patriotic and was ecstatic when I went in, but there was no one else who had looked at it as a potential profession. And I've looked back over it sometimes and said, what drew me into the military? I loved the physicality, and I loved that it looked like it would have that same feel as what you would get on a sports team. But also, it was the 80s, right? So it was like Red Dawn was the big movie when, I'm a little bit older than you, I think, but, a group of high school kids fighting the Soviets, right? And it was this very much Reagan-era patriotism. And for me, that clicked. It looked like that would be meaning and something that would give purpose. And, they paid for college, which wasn't terrible. And I was fortunate enough to get accepted into the United States Military Academy. Now, understand, I knew nothing about the academy system. I had a great guidance counselor. I was looking at doing reserve officer training, scholarship, go to a regular college. And I'd actually wanted to go to the Naval Academy for any of my West Point friends listening. I'm sorry to have to admit that, but I got appointed to West Point, and actually I feel very fortunate I did, because West Point, among the academies, the Army is the one large service of just pure leadership. The Marines are very similar, but it's a very different thing. And there's not that there's not leadership in the other ones, but really when it gets down to it, I don't care where the tech goes. If you're a platoon leader, you've got 120 people or whatever. Actually, that's a company. So about 35, 40 people who are looking to you to achieve a common mission and to lead them. And there's that, it's just very, very much the only thing out there like that. And I'd actually never visited West Point. I'd visited the Naval Academy, and it clicked there. There's a term at West Point called a gray hog. I think that was a closet gray hog, where the colors of our uniforms are gray, and you're called a gray hog if you love it there, because the pastime of every cadet at West Point is complaining. And I complained, but for me, it was transformative. It was this very, egalitarian and merit-based. If you did achieve, there were good outcomes. But it was also this amazing leadership lab of learning to follow, learning to lead, being able to find out who you were, understanding your authentic self. So it was amazing. And I look back when my daughter actually was going through the Coast Guard Academy, I said, revel in every aspect, even the suck. Enjoy it all, because you will miss it. And I did. And then I got out into the Army, served in the artillery at Fort Carson in Colorado, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed my 5 years and did a lot of fun things. I think it is one of the few career moves that young people can go into where you're given this immediate huge amount of responsibility. And no one questions your aptitude. They say, we've trained you, go do it. And I think that was like a fantastic opportunity to really try new things and learn about that next phase of leading individuals. Because at the academies, it does tend to be a little bit homogeneous in terms of the archetype, really driven. They're going to do what it's common character, common values. And when you get out in the Army, it's not the same thing. You've got people from all walks of life, all socioeconomic backgrounds, all races, all religions, and it's a great chance to even learn more. So I did that for 5 years, went on one deployment, luckily wasn't a combat deployment per se. So I was very fortunate. I never had to fight. And, mileage may vary on whether people feel that's fortunate, but seeing now what other people went through, I feel that was a very fortunate thing for me. But, enjoyed it. Got to do a lot of really different things that you don't realize the value of until later when you're in a different situation.
And that without the judgment. They say, do this, it's your responsibility. We don't care how, get it done, from what I gather from what you've told me.
It's interesting, and I can only speak for the U.S. military. But people look, people on the outside say, oh, okay, you march in formation, it must be very constrained. And nothing could be further from the truth. And anybody who's been through the military, especially senior NCO or officer, understands that the organizational dynamics training that you get just day to day through immersion is unbelievable because you can't micromanage. So the thing about the U.S. military, was all I can speak about, is it's very autonomous. When you're in the field, you're expected to make good decisions within command guidance, safety, risk management, all those things, but you're making critical and material decisions. You're coming up with better ways to do things. And I never saw any situation, and this shaped me as a leader, I never saw any situation where a senior leader, one above you, wouldn't say, oh, wow, you came up with a great idea, we're not going to implement it, which I did see in corporate America, if there's any risk associated with it. And in fact, you are expected to leave your platoon, company, battery, battalion, whatever, better than when you left it. You're supposed to improve on it, and not by just changing the name of one policy or SOP to another. It's, you're seeing things a different way and building upon the people that did it before to continue that excellence. And it's a rare organization like that, and I wish more people could experience it because it isn't what people think. It's not warmongerism. It's not, you can even serve in parts of the military that don't fight, but have that same ethos of character, integrity, improvement, excellence, all those things. And they aren't just words. And I think sometimes in the civilian world, we fall prey to buzzwords.
Yes, that is so true.
Right. And like this thing where everyone understands it and you have to say it, but you hang out with military people, especially ones who've served in combat. Character isn't just a buzzword. Character is something that defines people, and people are going to make the right decision. It's funny, you were talking about that middle section that we're going to be getting to, that Act 2.
Well, I think this is the sort of the contrast that's coming up now between the first and the second acts.
Right.
Yeah.
It's that Empire Strikes Back, despondency, because you look and you say, oh, I thought everything was like that. And it's very interesting. I would even encourage people who don't have a military background to study some of those things. Everything from strategy to, I'm doing some writing now on tying some of what I learned about leadership to my ADHD wiring and where was I successful? Where was I not? And I refer back to FM 22-100, Army Leadership. That is a document that hasn't changed materially for decades. And there's all these people writing leadership manuals out there. This is free. Download a PDF and you'll read it. You'll be like, holy mackerel, this is amazing. And you read it was written in the 80s or when, it's like 30 years old. And you understand what that environment is like and the plutonium that brings to the reaction when it works the right way.
No, fantastic. And a lot of the training that you get through the military, I think a lot of the lessons that we see in many books written now are based on, military principles and how they organize themselves. Even former, military officers or Navy SEALs are writing books on leadership now because they are proven tactics. I'm just thinking Jocko Willink right now, one of the more famous ones, who's written books on leadership and ownership as well.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and it's interesting, and this is a tangent, but it's relevant. When I kind of organize my thoughts and I look at when was this great innovation time in the U.S. where businesses were being formed and inventions and sort of our height of, I think, a lot of what sparked kind of where the arc that the U.S. was on. And you look at after World War II. And you had this huge veteran class of people, and the GI Bill helped, who then picked up the education, but they were running organizations on those same principles. They cared about their subordinates. That was a key part of them understanding that a great team builds shareholder equity because it builds loyalty. It builds loyalty to the individual leading, but also to the organization and the mission. And when I entered corporate America after the military in the 90s, that was all but gone.
Oh.
Right? We had lost, I think, a class of people that understood that an organization is healthy or not healthy based on the culture and the people that make it up. And that if you don't take care of them and you erode that trust, you will not have the same results. And I think the 90s was really where that erosion started, right? Right about when I started entering, right? Like all the pensions and all these things were starting to disappear. And it was all about how can we squeeze another dollar for shareholder equity. And I think that's a travesty. I think that we can relearn a lot from the military. And the good news is that we have a lot of people who have served.
That is very true. And in your words as well, you've kind of transitioned into that act too. You've entered it, I think, from the signs that we're gathering, it wasn't exactly the best kind of experience in corporate America. But I guess to get there, I mean, why did you leave the military and what did you do after that?
It's funny because I talk to my kids about that all the time. I left because of money and lifestyle. So it was a very unique time. I graduated in 1998 is when I got out of the military. The economy was booming and we had just gotten out of some degree of deployments, but we were drawing down. So there were a lot of officers, mostly major and above, who had really put in the time, decided that was going to be their career, and were getting reduced, like a reduction in force. They were getting let go. So they were upset with that. Many of them would say, oh, you know what? Don't do it. You'll be away from your family and you'll get screwed. And you have recruiters standing there who are saying, hey, guess what? You leave the Army today, you'll double your salary in a year. And that was the truth. So you're looking, you're saying, God, I got this guy on my shoulder saying, get the hell out, especially if you want to have a family. You've got this other person saying, yeah, they're right. Do what's right for your family, make a lot of money. And so that siren's call is pretty convincing. And there were other people like me who got out who went back in. And I think that I listened too much to both of those and didn't look enough at the people who knew me. I didn't look at my evaluations. I should have been better at, and it wasn't, I don't know that it was really a thing, is having a mentor and say, hey, you know what? I'm getting all this static. What should I do? I think staying in longer at least would have been a better choice for me. But I was like, when I make a decision, bam, I'm going to go ahead and do that.
Move forward, don't look back, I guess.
Exactly. And, I really should have sat down and mapped, right? Because if you look at a 20-year military career, if you go to the academy, especially, if you go to West Point, right, you're going to do your 5 years at a unit, then you're going to go do some advanced schooling and do a higher level command. So that might be your first 8 years. Then you're going to go, they're probably going to go send you for a graduate degree on their dime, wherever, right? You could go back and teach at West Point or maybe do some other discipline in the military where you're doing some really cool stuff. And then you do that you figure grad school's 3 years, you do that, you're already at like 11 or 12 years. And then you can really kind of come up with where am I going to go? And I didn't do that. I didn't really think what could the alternative look like? Because I said big bucks. And this is the travesty, is all the recruiters were saying, it's just like the Army. You're just not going to get deployed and you're going to make a lot more money. And I don't think they were lying. I just don't think that was the truth. I think there were similarities, but, I would be in a role, let's say, where for some of the time when I was at Citigroup, I was traveling 3 to 4 weeks a month, 3 to 4 days a week. So we scheduled the birth of my second child because I was on the road so much. Well, what's the difference of that versus going to the field or having a deployment other than traveling for work like that sucks? And if you're on a deployment, at least I think there's some joy in the things I was talking about. And this was before all the wars, right? I made this decision when the wall was going down, we were going to have no more war, right? It was a time when really it was sort of moving into a training mode. Yeah. And with the money thing, well, great, but that's not a guarantee. And, when I was in the tech industry and the bottom dropped out, all of a sudden the 15% raise I was promised disappears because the company didn't expect the telecom bust. Yeah. So it had more warts than I wish they had been honest about. And that was on me. That's not on them. I should have been a more informed buyer of what they were slinging. But I think that just the greater economy and what was going on in the military created a headwind of, okay, that made me susceptible to this other kind of direction.
I guess sometimes, we are romanced by the things going on in the world around us. In 98, you had the dot-com bubble, everything was changing, the internet was taking center stage, and America, I think the economy was growing, booming even until the dot-com bust. So, it's very hard to not be romanced by these potential opportunities and I guess endless, prizes that could come. But sometimes you have to take a path.
I don't think that enough value is put on the other things that I talked about, right? Where if somebody told me, hey, it's kind of just like the Army, you're going to make more money, yeah, you might travel and all this, but you can't trust people. Well, I might have said, well, wait a minute. That might be a non-starter for me. Integrity, people working together, knowing, and there's competition. Don't get me wrong, but the degree of general respect and all the things that are unique to military service were, I think, sold to some degree as analogous. But that was where the bullshit was. And I think if someone had said, you're never going to replicate that. Now, for me, I think I also should have been more serious about looking at like the National Guard or the reserves to continue to serve and to continue to have that same way I'm doing Aikido now. And I was like, if I'm done, I'm done. And I think I should have been probably a little more insightful on that one. But it's hard. That wasn't the time of the mentor the same way. I think it was more sort of this, going forth and doing these things. And I think now people are realizing, I really should have talked to somebody. And if they said, hey, if you still love it, keep your foot in it in the reserves or the Guard, and maybe you could re-enlist into the active duty or whatever, right? There just wasn't that guidance for me, and I didn't seek it.
And I guess, otherwise you would have kept the back door open. But
yes.
I mean, in a way, going into corporate America taught you a lot about what you wanted and didn't want.
Yes.
And what you liked and didn't like. And I guess that also explains why you're an entrepreneur now. But that itself started with a particular product that you developed from your own personal experience.
Yeah, now I will say I was the dreaming entrepreneur suffering in corporate America for a very long time. And
I know that story.
I don't think I read those tea leaves the right way to say this is where you should be, because you're coming up with ideas enough to develop a business plan or whatever. And I got my MBA in 2001, and I took partly an entrepreneurial track, and I should have been better at that. But I always thought I could find an entrepreneurial oasis in the middle of a corporate wasteland or a corporate desert. And I don't think I ever found that. So I had some good ideas that I built teams around, but I never took it to that certain level that I could have. And the last product, the one that I'm in market with right now, had a connection. And what was really interesting, it wasn't about starting a business. It was, okay, at that point, I had been in lending for about 25 years. Mortgage lending, right? So an entrepreneurial job, I would say, but heavily influenced by regulation and the other stakeholders in this. You can only do so much in the innovation part of it. So for me, the knife that I created was for my own issues. I am a disabled vet. Unfortunately, I didn't keep good enough records for my upper body issues, but a lot of the issues I have, arthritis and, tendonitis and all that, were from things I did in the military. And I was having an issue before I had my shoulder rebuilt. And I was a hobbyist knifesmith at the time. My wife, and again, when you talk about people who know you as an entrepreneur, bounce things off a spouse or significant other or family member in a way where they can give you good advice, because my family did look and go, this is a good idea. It does solve a problem, because I love to cook. I think owning nutrition is a key to longevity and health and all that. So for me, it was I couldn't use my arm, my primary arm, my dominant arm and hand, and I couldn't do it. I love making knives either, because you do have to swing a hammer sometimes. So that's where I came up with the NULU, which is what my primary job is right now. I'm like any entrepreneur. I got too many knives in the forge right now that I'm working on, but this was the one I was working on.
No, fascinating. And as you said, you like to do smithing. You have your own forge, which I think is also quite exciting. I'm also trying to make these connections with the Aikido, because you were describing an invisible blade just now. Did you feel like you needed a real blade?
No, you know what? What I found with the Aikido was it's about keeping your body soft. That's one of the things that I struggle with, right? So it's the only way that you can allow a technique to unfold is by allowing it to happen. And part of that softness is if you grip something, all of your strength goes here. Your body tenses up. You lose the ability of movement. And part of what influenced design of the knife was you really want to be cutting with more of your body. It shouldn't be an arm motion. I just wrote a recent article that I said if you designed a knife for a robot, it wouldn't look like the linear knife that we have today. It just wouldn't.
Interesting, yeah.
Because a linear knife is made, that's influenced by thousands of years of need and necessity, the primary necessity being stabbing, to either catch food, defend yourself, but it was a survival tool that also cut. And where I got to was you need an optimal cutting tool. It's something that's optimized to transfer force from your body. And if you're doing that, the real force of your body is not in your hand or your arm. It should be in your body, in the weight of your body, in your core, all of that area. So those fundamentals, like once I was starting to go through the design and validation, it was like, oh, this is why you don't grab somebody like this, because now you've lost all of your ability to do something because all the connection is right here, as opposed to having, again, a more organic flow of energy to what you're trying to do. And that was when the light bulb went off for my team and I to say, oh, if you're disabled, one of the things where if you did a big, plot of all the symptoms of all the different chronic issues and you made a big Venn diagram, upper body issues like grip, all of those things would be a common problem. So if you can take that out of the equation, you've got better cutting. So
Indeed,
as we kind of peeled back why this worked, it was like, oh, because you don't have to engage all of your muscles and tendons and ligaments in your arm, you're really just loosely gripping this object to allow your full body to engage what you're cutting.
I suppose the closest comparison I can think about is you don't use your wrist with a hammer. You would use your entire body
100%.
to do hammering.
100%.
Because otherwise you're not going to get the nail inside into the wood. So
right. Well,
that.
I was chopping some wood over the weekend. One of my mentors in Aikido years ago said, if you want to really get in touch with your core, go chop wood. Because after about an hour, if you're just using your arms, you're going to be spent. But if you sort of get that whole movement, and you let the tool do the work, with your body guiding it and getting you, that's where all of a sudden there's efficiency. And we ended up actually having to sort of reverse engineer it, because when I invented it, it was, and you can actually see the one right behind me if anybody's looking visually. That's the prototype. That was the first one, and it's made from a circular saw blade, because I've got all kinds of crap in my shop. And I was like, oh, you know what? I've been playing around with that design. And I'm like, God, I want to cook. So I just took it. I didn't have to forge it. It's some mystery metal. But I could create the shape. I could grind it, sharpen it, and use it. And that was a tool that I took in the kitchen a day after making it, said, I'm going to make, I don't even remember what I made, but I'm going to start using it. And it worked. And that's what got the whole process moving. But it wasn't a matter of saying, oh, I am going to design something that's at the intersection of Aikido and knife design and body mechanics. I said, I want to make soup or whatever I was making that day. Yeah. And that's when we sort of should have started with some of that. But my first partner and I were like, oh, it works. So that's when we just started going more prototyping and designing. And then once we were doing pitches and trying to help other people understand it. And that's when you're like, wait a minute, we don't even understand it enough to do that. And that's where we came up with some proprietary models on who the market is and some things that we're trademarking in terms of the why. What we call force transfer geometry is the geometry of the knife is optimized for the best force transfer from your body. Again, if you designed a robot that was cutting things, one, it wouldn't be humanoid, but two, you would look and say, okay, how do I have a piston that most directly is going to cut something so that I save on fuel costs? Well, if we can do that in the technology side, why are we still thinking about this, a linear knife, as the pinnacle of knife design? We can do better, and that's where we've ended up.
And so I guess for listeners who haven't seen the video or they can't see it in the shorts, we'll definitely put a picture of the knife that you've designed in the show notes. But essentially, it's like a half circle blade. I think it was 160 degrees of cutting angle. Degrees. Yeah, and it's meant to be held without putting too much force on it. The grip is directly above this blade. I guess think mezzaluna, if you know what that is, the Italian parsley slicing blade, but with a single handle directly on the center.
Well, and the name comes from the ulu. And the ulu is an Inuit knife. Yep. And there's a lot of those out there, but it was instinctively a good knife as a cutting multitasker. And it was the woman's knife. It was the knife, ulu, I guess, meant everything knife, because the men needed a pointy knife because you might fight a polar bear or have to kill a seal or do whatever, right? It was a field multitasker for them. And what we happened upon is, why does the ulu work? Well, the ulu works for that same reason. Handle above the blade, control area above the cutting area. Where we got to was, okay, how can you maximize that? And that's where we're currently patent pending on our design, because it takes that concept and brings it to the next level.
But essentially, from a problem of trying to cook, and I guess, as you mentioned, it's no doubt you do enjoy your cooking, and wanting to maintain that enjoyment, you came up with a solution. And then,
yes,
there's always the backstory we can fill later. I'm certainly, I love to do this with some of the modeling work I do.
Sure.
I like to build things because they're cool, and then I think of the backstory and infill later. But often results in something that, is highly innovative and can help a whole demographic of people who will be struggling with these kinds of issues as well. And I mean, from, I guess, some stories, I think you've had professional chefs try out this knife as well.
We've had a litany of people try it. The chefs are actually the hardest. Because a chef, part of formal culinary training is knife technique. And it's very, very hard to have that debate with somebody who has invested time, right? For them, it's a sunk cost. So that's where we sometimes get a headwind. But the ones who are now dealing with carpal tunnel, arthritis, tendonitis, all the things I have, there was a meat cutter who had been in the culinary ecosystem for years. And a friend of mine who I knew at West Point became an ortho, and he gave our knife to one of his patients. And the guy wrote us back and said, if I had this 40 years ago, I wouldn't be dealing with what I am now. So the problem is, it's the old in business, right? The vitamin versus the aspirin. And the people that we're appealing to are the aspirin people who have issues already, when they don't understand that this vitamin is going to prevent the aspirin later. So it's been sort of an interesting angle on that, because it speaks to efficient and universal design. More often than not, once adopted more mainstream, something that was unique for a particular subset of people becomes the norm, because everyone goes, oh, this is just more efficient. Well, adaptive means more efficient in some cases, because the people who are using it to adapt need the efficiency to do the task in the first place. And that's where we came up with the way we look at ability and disability in our organization is, it's not binary, it's not a switch, it's not an identity, it's task-based. And this actually goes back to my military time, because in the Army, when you evaluate somebody on being able to do something, it's 3 components. What's the task, under what conditions, and what are the standards? That's it. It's very clear cut. So ability and disability is task related. You're able or not able to do a task or set of tasks. If those tasks are stacked enough, then it represents an issue with your life in general. But generally, it's not as simple as the way we look at it now. So we have this model that we call the ability curve, where you look at it and say, okay, if you're cutting, it's a formula of strength, dexterity, and coordination versus what you're cutting with whatever tool you're cutting. And you either can or cannot do that. And you can or cannot do it on different levels of capability. So for us, that's how we've started defining this. And it's a very different thing. Like, I'll argue with someone and say a child is functionally disabled for an adult task. It's not a disabled child, but they do not have the ability to cut the way we would allow them to. Even if they have the strength and dexterity and coordination, maybe they don't have the judgment to be safe. So if they can't do it, they can't do it.
You remind me of a quote that just seems so perfect in this particular instance, which is, everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it's stupid.
Right.
And I think it's really what is your ability to do something? And everyone has a certain, call it, variability in what they can and cannot do. And I think that's in all of us. There's a certain balance there. And I like the way you frame that in a very gray space rather than a pure black and white.
Well, and it's a curve, right? And I don't remember, I think I was on another podcast, and what someone said, right? Like, our model can be used for chronic conditions or, specific things that will alter the arc of the curve. But generally, we're all living the riddle of the Sphinx. What was on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the day, and 3 legs in the evening. Yep. And that, to me, is that life, everybody has that curve. And that age is all of our chronic condition. We will all age into disability. And I would love to think it's that radical of thinking, but AARP here in the US has their own accelerator and incubators and things like that for aging tech. So they get it. The bigger issue is, I think, culturally, and really all I can speak to is the US, because I think some other cultures do geriatric engagement and care better. But generally, it seems like here in the US, I'm invincible till I'm not. And now I have to use a walker, and I'm going to fight that because that represents me now being disabled, and I'm not going to use the walker, and now I'm going to take a fall and break my hip, and then it's a death spiral. Instead of saying, oh, you know what? I can't bend down much anymore, but I want to stay active. So I'm going to buy Skechers, right? Skechers, my kids make fun of me. I buy Skechers. But, because I can put them on more easily, I'm walking more often. Because I'm walking more often, I'm working the muscles that I need to not be a fall risk later or not need a walker earlier. And it's, if people more accepted the human condition that we're all going to be in the ground or whatever, alternative people decide after they leave the mortal coil, and it's not a straight line. You didn't come into the world fully able, and you ain't going to leave that way unless it's, a really quick thing. Like if I had gotten my heart fixed, that could have been how I left. But generally, if you live a productive life, it's going to be a curve. And I think if more people looked at that and said, we need to think more about standardizing door width so that any rehab or any new house that's built is immediately age in place. Right? Like that kind of thinking. And even with my knife, the ability to say, I love my whatever Japanese knives that I bought for cooking, and maybe I take them out every once in a while. But day to day, if I use a more efficient product, it will less exacerbate my arthritis. Maybe I won't decline as quick, but I'll also keep preparing food. So my diet will be better, and I can eat anti-inflammatory without spending a ton of money. And I think it's got to be a code switch. It's got to be people thinking better. And I think generally we did it better in the past when generations were more connected and you had multi-generational households. I think some other cultures do it better than in the US, but generally as globally, I think it just makes things better for everybody.
No, indeed. And I mean, so many threads that I can follow here, but I think the one thing that it really highlights is, on the one hand, the cultural side, which I think we need to become more open towards and to understand that. And the ability curve that you've explained is, I think, something that really shows it. We have to train our ability when we come into this world, and we will lose certain abilities over time. Maybe they'll be replaced by others, but we don't know. Right. But the other side of it is also the design of the environment. And we've already heard a few terms here, something I'd like to do a quick 101 on because it fascinated me when I read about it. And also because I've encountered this particular aspect in some of the work I've been doing around trying to, protect a particular development against flooding. And so, you get into a lot of discussions with, I guess, the first term being barrier-free design. And there's a few different, terms floating around in design theory, and they all address a different thing. And we'll get to adaptive design, which is what you're using by the end of it. But I guess, for the listeners also to be familiar with what these different types of design philosophies or theories are. I mean, barrier-free design emerged in the 1950s, mainly Europe, Japan, from what I read, and US in response to World War II veterans, Korean War veterans, which then led to, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, the first accessibility standards, we hear that word a lot, were published in 1961 and then followed up by an Architectural Barriers Act in 1968. And so sort of being the first term, this was really about removing obstacles. So in the classical sense, make sure there's a ramp for a wheelchair at the entrance of a building and not just staircases. And that expanded then into products and spaces through this idea of accessible design in the 1970s. And I think the story of the knife really shows, that's with one element, there's certainly a lot more around it. Then you mentioned universal design. I think it was coined by Ronald Mace. I'm not sure. I think it was a bit later than that, maybe in the 1980s. 1989 was when he founded, I believe, the Center for Universal Design. And I guess it also shaped quite a few, call it policies around, housing, around disabilities. But it's this idea of moving away from just simply removing obstacles to actually designing broadly and diverse. So trying to come up with a solution such as the doorway, I guess, would be a good one so that people of all types and diversities can access it. So we'll definitely put some links there so readers can read more into it. More recently, we hear the word inclusive design, which, if I had to sum it up, it's apparently when designers have to make choices, it's often about what do you subtract. And this idea of inclusive design is to try and undo that, because by removing things from a design, you often exclude certain users. And that's, I think, something we definitely don't want. So that then came onto the playbook of possible design theories. And now fast forward to today, we have what you call adaptive design. So I guess in a nutshell, how do these different philosophies, especially now your proposal for adaptive design, really differentheremselves?
I think they're all windows into the same house. Really, I think like the reason we've gone adaptive, I'll be honest, I think it's just as much marketing, because the people who are more likely to buy our product are the ones, as I said earlier, for whom our product is an aspirin, right? Our product is what solves a problem in front of them. So you have to reach them on their level. And I think for the disabled community, I think adaptation is a very positive direction, right? They're still themselves adapting to be able to do what tasks are needed. I think, it's interesting with like removing barriers, and maybe there's a through line. It's always interesting that when it's put more toward policies and design that are geared toward a normality narrative, right? Like we're removing barriers for you to be just like us, as opposed to saying on any given day, we're a sum total of all the things that we need to do and how well we can do those based on where we are at that time. And I think that for me, it's more the fluid. It's more sort of that nebulous thing of understanding that at any given time, you're going to move in and out of different capabilities. So I like the more universal thinking. I like that because what that says is there's a universality of us all going to be having issues. You could, like, if I go on the Aikido mat and break my foot on a weekend, well, then I need those more universally adaptive things until I heal up. And I think with like removing barriers, I think it's more back to that identity, like you're disabled and I'm removing the barriers that exist for you to be able to achieve the way I have, as opposed to being able to do it on your own terms. I think inclusive, I think it's a good term, but I think again, it means that there's an us them. And I think what I like about our model is we're just all on a different part of our curve. This is the human condition. And I think in a lot of ways, stratification of how different cultures and societies do things mean that it defines normality a certain way, as opposed to saying these variances have always existed and we need to really think of us all this way. Because one of the things we talk about, aside from, age being this chronic condition everyone has, everybody's a second away from a stroke, car accident, whatever. Like, we're fragile. And I even say from a self-preservation perspective, the more that we start thinking about universally designing the environment in which we all work means you're hedging, right? You're making an investment if you buy into this, both conceptually and intellectually, as well as financially and regulatory and all the other ways. You're investing in you or one of your family members not having to deal with what people heretofore have had to deal with. And, people will shrug that off until they're in that situation. And then it's the most important thing in the world, right? Like, it's a very interesting aspect of human psychology to not be able to empathize with the people who need it today and only feeling that it's important when it personally affects you.
Or to think in the long term and preparatory mindset, so the proactive rather than the reactive, which, we see this everywhere, whether it's in environmental management, where I'm based in, whether it's in business, any kind of contingency plans are often thrown out the window because of the effort required to make them until it actually happens. And then, the fat lady sings.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. But essentially, you started with the knife. It sort of showed, what is possible. You built really that whole philosophy around it. And it was quite successful, being crowdfunded in 2024 on Kickstarter, I believe. And then you launched in 2025.
Yes, it was about a year ago that we actually did our first show. We unveiled it at the Abilities Expo in Chicago. It was in the Schaumburg area. And those are a group of shows that they do, conferences, I guess I don't know what they call it. It's Expo, all around the country in different large cities. opportunities for people to gain access to products and services that fall under what we're talking about. And generally, that was where we really understood where we have a competitive advantage over other products because we spent so much time understanding that market. And that was really... It was a financial success. We sold more knives in a day than we had.
Wow,
fantastic. But more for us, it was a light bulb because we've been talking upper body. And that's how we had been as a company up until unveiling at that show. And then when we unveiled at the show, I was working the booth. I was alone one day. And people who had to sit when they cut, like someone who's in a wheelchair or who might use a walker but just can't stand, vision impaired, all used the knife and used it in ways we hadn't thought about. So somebody who's in a wheelchair, for example, can't generate the leverage that you can to use a traditional knife, even if you're a trained chef. You can't get the angles the right way. Mm-hmm. And this one person, came up to our booth and they were in a wheelchair and we were doing demos and used the knife in a sort of a rowing motion toward themselves. And I stopped and I kind of looked at it and I was like, damn, I never even thought of that. But it was, one, them adapting. And one of the reasons why we call our knife adaptive is not just the ergonomic design. It's the fact that there's really two grips that you can use, and the 160 degrees of cutting surface means that the user can find what works for them. And that's the adaptive component, where it's not just, okay, we're going to take a straight knife and put a perpendicular handle, and now your grip is different, but you're doing it the same way that you would if you were using a linear knife with a straight handle. This is where you'll see people use it in all different ways. And as long as it's safe, and I always recommend to use a cutting glove, then great. Like, that's what it's all about. A good tool, unless it's a super specific tool, but a good tool should provide the user some ability to flex to where they need to use it the right way. And that was when we were like, oh, even in the vision impaired, the fact that the alignment, the same alignment that provides the efficient cutting, because it aligns with the musculoskeletal structure, also means control. Didn't think of that. Vision impaired, right? All of a sudden, somebody who has less ability to know where that blade is knows where the blade is because they know where their hand is. Well, again, they may use a cutting glove, but it's safer and it's more efficient for them. So that was the eye-opener where we realized that we could service a lot more people than just the upper body people.
And really a real-world example of how adaptive design works, and something that I hope will definitely take over the design space going forward.
Right.
Yeah. But I guess from your side, you're also now supporting new ideas around adaptive design, helping other inventors incubate their ideas as well.
Yeah, you know what? I always put myself out there to do it, and I am trying to do some speaking on understanding, more than anything, first and foremost, what we were talking about with like the ability curve that we talk about is understanding, especially in leadership roles, the impact of thinking that way, both on the dynamics where people are going to be more honest with the challenges they're having. If you're able to create that more, that environment that encourages that, but also by taking that approach, you may find someone who fills a task need that you weren't thinking of primarily before. So really understanding that it isn't this binary thing of like you're able or you're disabled. Like, I just think that it's a really dangerous thinking if you want to optimize your teams.
No, indeed. And I think, we're seeing this far too often in the world when it's really a gray area and it's really a spectrum that you're on. But that's also a great segue into another aspect that you've been also very active in. And so we've been talking a lot about physical disabilities or physical, how do we call this? I hate using the word.
No, you know what? Listen, what's interesting is I'm challenged with that all the time because I think that people's view of ability and disability is very personal. So I a lot of times I just try and pick up on the cues. So, I hear people who have disabilities talk about being disabled, but I think it's less for them about saying, hey, I'm disabled, because I'm a disabled vet. I'll say it all the time. I think it's a matter of, as long as that's not tied to their value and they know that, then if it's not a pejorative, I think that's when the labeling is less of an issue.
Yeah. No, I mean, indeed. And I'm always very careful when I pick my words, but sometimes I
Sure.
think you just have to say it outright, knowing that that is not your intent.
Right.
But yeah, we talked about the physical aspect, but then there's also a lot of mental health issues going around in the world and also mental disabilities. And there's been one debate. I mean, I certainly had someone I know that recent being a few months now, spoke to me about it. But you mentioned just now you had ADHD wiring, which I think is a very nice way of putting it. But that in itself sprouted a whole different pathway for you at the same time.
Yes. I can't be treated with pharmaceuticals. So for me, I do look at it as a wiring, and that's a whole nother rabbit hole that we can go down. But when I look at like the cognitive things, if someone has a traumatic brain injury, that I think is more of, you were wired, you were put together a certain way, and an external factor impacted your ability to do things. Dementia, all those things, I kind of look at the same way. With my ADHD, and I think ADHD in general, and again, mileage may vary with people how they look at it, but I do think that it's the deficiency or the aspect of needing to be diagnosed comes from where we've gotten to as a society or a culture. And I think this spans a lot of cultures, because the more rigid something is, the more difficult it is for someone with this kind of wiring to add value, because many times the value is in playing within a very, very narrow set of rules and doing what you're supposed to, and all the things that are antithetical. So this has sort of been a new angle, because I was adult diagnosed, and it was like, oh yeah, no kidding, right? We talk about Act 1, where I did better in the Army. I liked the Army more than I thought I did. Well, that's a ADHD person's delight, right? Like high frequency decision making. Your value is much more based on the contribution that you have. People overlook some of the unique aspects of how you communicate because they know you have a character and integrity and all that. So I have been trying to take the angle more about it's not necessarily a disability, but the way you frame it is still right. It's the ability curve. It's saying, okay, I got somebody who's wired like this, who can do real quick risk analysis, great pattern recognition, makes decisions very, very quickly, can hyper focus on the right things when they understand the stakes. Well, all of those are like when you see some of the crap on the internet, symptoms of ADHD, and you're like, that's a feature set. Those aren't bugs. Those are features. You're using the wrong app.
And strengths from the sound of it.
Right. And that's where, when I look at the grimness of my Act 2, it was because I was in situations that did not lend themselves to be able to use those features. They were bugs. And when I made the shift to the entrepreneurial space, it was like, oh, all of a sudden I saw that through line of Army, entrepreneurialism, very similar things. And I think there was a time, again, in corporate America where there was more innovation and risk tolerance, and the concern of management at every level wasn't, how do I not get fired? And if I let this person run a little bit, I'm going to own that on an accountable level and I could lose my job. That's not out there in the entrepreneurial space. So I am trying to help people with this wiring to say, hey, I'm not here to say whether medication or not is the right way to go, but are you being medicated to then place yourself back in the matrix of like that very, very confined environment? Or are there ways to, one, achieve better as an individual with this wiring? But the writing that I'm doing right now, I'm actually finishing part 4 of it today, is understanding this type of wiring and how do you work as a team member, accountable to your own impulses and all that. How do you act as a subordinate? And this is one of the parts that people forget. Being a dynamic subordinate is as important as being a good leader. And it's not about bitching and moaning about when things aren't right. It's helping the leader succeed to help you succeed, and it becomes a flywheel. So those were the first 2 parts. And then the one I wrote last week was leading people with this wiring. Instead of saying, oh, it's hard, I only want people who are going to fall in line. How do you leverage that, cultivate it, nurture it, and add value? And the one I'm finishing today is, if you're a guy like me and you have this wiring and you're in a leadership position, what do you do? And it's very interesting. I think that there needs to be more on whether you feel it's a deficiency or a genetic, issue, or as some people look and say, hey, when we were tribal, you needed people to do both things, right? That was how society survived in smaller groups, because you had to have people who would take risks and do certain things. And that's kind of where I fall. Now, I've had the convenience of late diagnosis, successful, career, and not being able to be treated. So those three things make me look and say, okay, this is my journey, but I am trying to help people better understand. And frankly, it's interesting, the world as it is today, globally, socioeconomically, everything. The reason there's so much friction is there's uncertainty. The best people for this stuff are the ones like me, who do look at, pattern recognition is a huge thing. Look and go, oh, wow, I see something that we have to react to quickly. Everybody else is saying, no, you're crazy. And the people like me are going, no, I was a very good, part of my time in the Army, I was an S2. And in the artillery, they all come from, they're not the intelligence officer corps, you're the intelligence officer, but you're an artillery guy. But a lot of it is saying, okay, what's unveiling on the battlefield? What's the enemy's capabilities? What are they going to do? And it's a really good role for that kind of job. So, I think that we're maybe moving into a phase of history where, again, there's a value put on people who have this sort of wiring.
And I think it's really that reframing aspect. And, I'm parking that pattern recognition thought because there's an anecdote from my side as well about something I heard. And it's also related to a topic that you're very passionate about at the moment too. But I guess to the framing thing, it's really about contrasting, words like damage deficit disorder with gifted different, or the more recent neurodivergent term. And it's like, try to not be black and white here. Much like we've spoken about in the physical disabilities, I think a lot of the same principles apply. It's about the task, and you've described it so wonderfully just now. And, at what point, our mind is in what state to complete what kinds of tasks.
Right.
And there's, it's just a different way of doing things. It's just, I think the modus operandi of the corporate world, of society, is not geared towards people that have these different ways of seeing things, of looking at things. And so I guess it's adapting, should I say, to use the word we've used a lot.
No, absolutely.
To
absolutely.
Our approaches. Yeah.
And I think that's the leadership task, right? That's the, one, building the team that supports one another and not just filling a hole, but understanding and recognizing all that different wiring. Because I think, people wear a mask, right? I think that people who have certain wiring tend to be more genuine and authentic in general. But I'm convinced everybody's got, everybody's wiring's a little bit messed up coming from the factory, and normality just becomes how the majority view things. So if you did have a 25% population of any given subset that was different, well, depending on how that's framed, that could be a condition, or, oh, okay, well, great. It's just a different way of looking at things. And I think when you get all that firing on all cylinders, that's the benefit. That's where you've got, especially as a leader, you want those different varying views. And you want to watch them duke it out a little bit, because the ability to watch that happen in a good, constructive way is to be able to say, okay, this is the right way to go, as opposed to having it all one way or the other.
Because you've covered all possible perspectives and aspects. Yeah.
Yes.
It's again, majority benchmarking, much like how, we treat intelligence nowadays. I'm building multiple segues into the topic I do want to get to. But I mean, intelligence, we group people into the less intelligent, the more intelligent. It's like, it's just a concept, but doesn't speak anything about the person itself. And I think this concept's about to fly out the window, because now intelligence is at our fingertips. And in a way, relating that to pattern recognition as well. It is.
It's interesting. I've always looked at that as, when you look at intelligence, if you looked at military intelligence or any intelligence organization, they turn data into information. And I think that's, as individuals too, that's your intelligence, right? Your ability to bring all the stimulus, all that you've learned, all that your experience and all that, and being able to create information from that that's got value for somebody else. And that's a big part of what I talk about is value. Like, how are you adding, if you're adding value, it doesn't matter how you're wired. Somebody will just say that guy's quirky instead of ADHD because, they're adding value to the enterprise. They're adding value to the relationship. And that's, I think, how it plays out that way. But I just hijacked your thread on where we were going with intelligence.
I mean, I was using that as a parallel comparison only because, I was just thinking of where our world is going to. To date, you always see people put on a pedestal if they seem to know a lot, they're incredibly intelligent, they say, because, they're able to synthesize a lot of knowledge that they have. Then words like wisdom are being thrown around as well. And I think, these words will have even more important meanings, nuances, and, they will change in what society sees as valuable, because I guess with the world of AI now, that's all going to be changing. And so to come back to the pattern recognition aspect, I attended a seminar a few weeks ago, actually given by Tony Robbins, and he gave a very interesting insight about how one of the most important skills going into an AI-powered future is pattern recognition. So the question is, will those then very good at pattern recognition start becoming, judged by society as the more, higher ups compared to those that previously were judged by intelligence? And I think we have a judgment problem in society and we need to get rid of that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I do think using AI and adoption of AI favors people with ADHD in some ways. This is just anecdotal for me, but seeing other people, how they're using it stuff, because you can carry on 3 conversations or however many. You can leave off with a conversation and pick it up where it was. You can go down a rabbit hole and very quickly figure out what you want to do with it. So for me, it's been a combat multiplier in a lot of ways. And it's interesting. I did want to double click on something you talked about with wisdom, because I think wisdom is the context for intelligence, right? I found as I've gotten older and the value I add to my kids, they're intelligent, but they're coming back to me for parental wisdom of what do you think I should do here? And when you talk about who's going to flourish in where we're headed with AI, I don't know whether it's necessarily ADHD versus not, it's all that, but I think you gotta know what the right answer is in a lot of ways to be able, or what it looks like, and then, have the wisdom to use it in the right way, right? Those are the people. And what I've read a lot of is it's going to be the people who are less technical and maybe who have humanities or liberal arts backgrounds because they understand history, language, math. Okay, now what are the patterns across those, right? Like when you look at the, first time I think about it this way, if you look at the academies, the military academies, and they're all similar. Yeah. Most of the cadets, if not all of them, or midshipmen at the Naval Academy, take a very, very rigid liberal arts background course curriculum for the first 2 years. You don't take an elective till you're a second year junior kind of thing. But what they're teaching is all this stuff is interconnected. And for you to be intelligent, you need to have a working knowledge of all these things because they're all going to play in together. Chemistry might affect how the soil is in a theater of operations where you're right. And you don't have to know chemistry, but you have to understand why things react the way they do and all those things. So I think that's who's going to thrive. I do think that it does tend to favor people who are kind of all over the map because now you're plugging into a structure that allows you to do that. But I agree with you. It's going to be a very interesting ride until people figure it out.
No, indeed. And I mean, you embrace it fully. I remember when we first met, you likened yourself to Tony Stark and Jarvis.
Yes, and it's funny. Every time I hear someone say that, I'm like, my ego's not that big. But what I do say is, I think that if you watch the interplay, that everybody could have a little of their own Tony Stark. And it's really you own the conversation, but you can do, and I know I'm using the word organic a lot, but I think that really is, you can do the ideation and the validation and the modeling in a way that took so much effort before. And the ability to say, okay, let's try this. Okay, let's try this. Let's try this. Boom, 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 boom. And you're working through all these different things so quickly that you're getting to better answers, not just the correct one that might have been the correct one before when you had more limited resources. And you're like, it's the correct one because it's good enough and we have no more resources. So what I encourage people to do is think of it that way, right? It wasn't ever, he was never asking Jarvis out on a date, right? So I think there are ways, there are barriers that shouldn't be crossed. And I'm going to nerd out and say, okay, I'm talking Jarvis pre-turning into vision kind of thing, right? Like until he turned into a sentient thing. I'm talking before that. For all the nerds out there, I hope I got some props. But
for listeners who've lost the plot, we're talking Marvel comics,
right. But in that regard, I think it is relevant to say you can't look at it as sentient. You have to look at it as piggybacking on your sentience in terms of right and wrong and all that. What it's giving you is an infinite assistant that can communicate in a casual way. And I think that's sort of where that Jarvis kind of feeling is, because also eventually it will do everything you ask it to do. So it gives you that flexibility. It's not going to say, no, I'm not going to do it, where an assistant might say, go pound sand, right? This will do it for you. And I think it's hugely powerful, and I think people need to embrace it for that reason, but also understand where the limits and the regulatory and other aspects of it need to occur. Because if you don't know what it can do, and you don't have some of those oh shit days where you're like, oh my God, it can do that. That's when you look and go, okay, we really do need legislators and leaders who are looking at it and saying, hey, here's the deal. I'm all about anti-regulation, but here's where this stuff can go. And make sure, I'll be semi-political here. Make sure that the money of the people who are making the money aren't the ones who are making the decisions on the regulation for this, because I think that can get super, super dangerous.
We still need checks and balances, especially.
Yeah, but it's interesting, and just a little jog, and I'll come back to the path. But
yeah, sure.
The other side of it is dangerous too. I was listening to a podcast over the weekend, and there was an NYU professor who's talking about it, and he was talking about academics. And that there's the big headwind, and like this is the hill we're gonna die on the academic side. And I see it with my kids in college or in high school, where there's like a no AI policy, and I'm like, what does that accomplish? It should be what's a responsible AI policy. And why are the tech people not saying we're going to make a closed down system that a school system can use that gives access to all the information, but we can also see what keystroking the students are doing to understand how they're using it and give them an edge in the economy of the future, because the other countries are doing that kind of thing. Or also being able to articulate, and this is leadership in the classroom. A professor or a teacher being able to say, here's the deal. When you leave class, there's no way that I can prohibit you from using AI. And if you're really good at it, you're going to be able to cover your tracks in a manner that generally we won't be able to find out. Wouldn't it be better to make them all into their own little Tony Starks to say, here's the deal. We're going to create our own models to know how much work you're doing, but we're going to create a mechanism where you're able to maybe understand how to use it in a way to get even further than you could in understanding a concept. I mean, even in history, if you have a wild way of bringing everything together. I mean, I grew up in the library days, right? I grew up in the days where you had to go to the library and look at microfiche and stuff like that. I'm older than you think, but that puts a governor on your ability to truly explore a concept. But now you have all this knowledge, and you can go, well, wait a minute. Are these things interconnected historically? And you can figure it out like that and really go in a direction that you might not have before. And I think that's where academia is missing the boat on some of this, because they're so worried that people are just going to go, write me a paper. Well, that paper's going to suck, right? Versus having a student be able to dictate how this all works and understand, it's not like they're sitting there with a spiral notebook writing it out longhand anymore. This is not how stuff goes. So I think we're missing the boat on that in a lot of ways, on where we can maybe live the potential of where it's going. I mean, we're using it now in our business and how we're going to market the knife.
Yeah. I mean, to cap off that thought, I think it's been some really great arguments you're offering there for AI and how it's changing also education, academia itself. I'm seeing the impact AI is having on academia and research, still keeping in touch with the research world despite having started my own business. But yeah, I guess it is a case of trying to separate what are the key skills that we should preserve. I'm thinking handwriting is one of them, because writing as a thinking skill really nurtures your mind. But then, what are the skills that, we then have to embrace and build using AI to our advantage as well?
And it's very interesting. I'm going to wax a little bit philosophical here, but really what AI can't do is what humanity and what all of us share in common, right? Like you and I are talking from different countries right now, but there's so many through lines of what we think. And, from anything from how we're looking at disability, everything else, right? So that's that humanity piece. And if we would spend a little more time on that, I don't think the AI becomes as big an issue because the majority of people will have empathy and understand the displacement it's going to cause and all these other things. So I don't think it's a hard formula. It's whether we have the resolve to continue as a species to value that part of what we are. And if we do, then we'll control the AI. We'll have a better shot at it, at least. If we don't. And the interesting thing is if we did bring more to that, because I actually moved from GPT to Claude, because I like it better. I think the output's better.
Likewise.
But Claude is the way the language models are being trained are, I think, sort of the elite users. Someone who's like, all right, I'll go to a tokenized model. I'm going to go to a model that's got a little bit more guardrails. So that model is being trained on people who value that, who share those things. I found ChatGPT to give worse answers because it seems to be learning the worst parts of us. I mean, I won't even touch Grok because I've heard it's terrible. Well, that's being trained on certain things that are becoming that. But if we all, as a species, are a little bit more tuned into certain things that are all shared, then we got a better chance. And it will become more of a Claudeverse where it's like, okay, we're training this, what makes us great. We'll see. That or we blow ourselves up. One of the two, right?
Could be one of the two. Right. Oh my God, there's so many doomsday scenarios floating around that I've always stumbled upon, but let's not go there. No. But I guess, for yourself, what exciting things are you working on now, and what's the next big product you're going to reinvent?
Right now, I do most of our business development, and that notwithstanding the AI thing where search and everything is becoming AI enabled. So you just have to think of positioning a product differently. As I said earlier in the interview, our product is high friction from a sale perspective. There's a learning curve in understanding the benefits and features. There's understanding your individual use case as it applies to what you do. So FAQs, sell sheets, just a static website, even videos I feel are insufficient. And so I'm developing a proprietary agent that not only is, hey, tell me a little bit about the knife, and it can do that, but specific to a symptomatic profile, how can someone use it the best for them to adapt, right? We talked a little bit about that. And to be able to ask questions where if I'm the one presenting, I can sell 30 knives in a day because I'm passionate about it. I know the use case. I can show the different ways, all of those things. That's what we're doing with the product now. I've created this thing I call the NULU Navigator, and I just did a recent release of it, but trying to create it to have the whole array of knowledge that people need, data to turn into information. Anything from, and I haven't gotten any OTs or PTs on board yet, but them providing input on how the knife works so that when someone uses it, they're getting validated therapeutic guidance.
Interesting,
What I did for me actually on the use case and how to use the cuts was I had it interview me. Right? Like I was sitting there trying to figure out, okay, like how do you create the right truth document? And I was like, okay, well, I could sit there and figure it out myself, or I could tell Claude, you are an interviewer. I'm a specialist in this product. Take as long as you need to fully understand it. And you put it in voice mode and you just have a conversation. Sounds kind of like the Tony Stark Jarvis thing, right? Where you move away from this, where your expectations are, and you allow it to understand because it is good at pattern recognition too. Agreed, it knows the right questions to ask. So I'm trying to create this in-depth agent that not only can help with selling the knife, but later on a user could say, oh, you know what? I've got this recipe. I want to convert over to anti-inflammatory ingredients, and how do I use my knife to cut them? And it could do that. And then a level higher is how do you get it reimbursed? Our core demographic is the disabled space. There is a disability tax, at least in the U.S., on a lot of stuff. And when I say that, it's informal But by that, I mean that the products that are sold in the adaptive space, kind of like the pink tax on a lot of feminine products, are just things are just more expensive. So the ability to get it reimbursed or to borrow one to see if it's the right product, or to, understand the whole ecosystem of nonprofits, government agencies, and all of those to help people gain access, it will do that too. To be able to say, here's your best course of action. Again, without any promises, but it's hard enough to have a challenge or a disability without saying, okay, now how do I find the right product that I may be able to get reimbursed, and it's very, very time intensive. So I'm trying to bring all those stakeholders together through this AI platform.
No, incredible. But looking forward to seeing how that evolves in future. I'll have to check out and see if I can try one of these knives as well, because I think it's quite fascinating. But yeah, I mean, Douglas, we've covered so many different aspects today, and I think one of the key words is really reframing it, rethinking how the world really works and not seeing everything as black and white. Lots of great messages there, but like I do with every guest, I'd love to get into the key questions I asked all my guests so that listeners can get to know even more about you. So in your view, the word innovation has popped up in the discussion, but what does it truly mean to you, and how has it shaped the way you approach challenges and opportunities in your work?
I look at innovation as problem solving in unique ways. I mean, it's just looking at something and saying, hey, how can I solve that problem, and not accepting the status quo.
No, fantastic. And was there a key moment, a book, paper, or person that completely changed the course of your career or mindset? We've discussed some of the acts in your life, but what other moments come to mind?
I don't think it's hard to put a finger on particular moments, because I think that there's too much of a thread, right? Like I was talking to my son once, and I was, God, I wish I'd become an entrepreneur earlier. And he goes, no, it happened at the right time, because you can appreciate it and you have certain wisdom and things like that. So I think you have to look at the whole story and the whole narrative to be able to do it. But I did have an aha moment on my wiring when my daughter was at the Coast Guard Academy. She was, and admittedly on her part, she will say this, she was a terrible cadet her first 2 years. And after her first year, when she started filling leadership roles, or was going to, we had to sit down, and I said, you can mess around your first year. You're just a subordinate. When you become a leader, there's other people at stake, and you need to step up. And I pulled some of my old OERs, officer evaluation reports from when I was in the Army, and I pulled them to show to my daughter and say, this is what I did. This is the kind of leader I was. You decide. Like, it's your choice. But I went back and read them, and that's when I really started to develop my belief on how my wiring was a feature, not a bug, and how I needed to move into environments that allowed that to happen and allowed me to add the value that I was talking about, where I can be more successful as an individual.
No, that's an incredible moment of realization. I mean, I've had a few of those where I start to understand myself. And I think when you in life understand yourself better, it's almost like a huge weight lifted off your shoulders.
Oh, I think reflection is one of the most important skills, especially now that I've gotten into some more Zen and ego death and things, to look and go, wow, that was a wrong decision, and I own that wrong decision. Or even, this is how I'm wired, and no system, no medicine, nothing is going to change that. And I am way better breaking authentic and who I am than trying to subvert it in a way that doesn't work.
No, that's true. And I think once you accept that and you work with it, you find, life becomes really fun trying to find solutions.
It does. It does,
work
man.
for you.
It does. I wish I was making more money, but I love what I do. And, that's at 50, almost 56. That's being rich in a different way, I think.
But it's incredible to hear. But with all the things you're doing and all the writing you're doing as well, time management becomes an interesting topic. So any tips that you can offer in terms of time management? How do you balance personal and professional time?
It's funny. This is where AI for me has been an accelerator, because I may be walking the dog and dictating an article. And, so for me, it's interesting. It's become less about time management and more about appreciating time. So I have found for my wiring that time blocking works very well to ensure that I'm getting tasks done. But along with the wisdom that I think I've picked up over time. And fortunately, I've started to really embrace and listen to some people who have guided my thinking in a good way. People I know or people who just have podcasts is to say, spend some time appreciating other stuff, right? So I think when you are selective and you say, okay, this is family time, I'm going to spend time doing this or time appreciating a certain thing. Like yesterday was a beautiful day. I had all kinds of crap to do and I laid down in the hammock and took a nap because it was just a perfect day. That helps me be more productive on the other things. So I think it's more appreciating how finite time is and less looking at managing it than sort of, I don't know, again, kind of moving with it in a way that you don't get too wrapped around the axle on you optimizing it, I guess.
Yeah, I can see how that would work. I mean, I've tried, moments where I don't think too much about managing the time and just going with the flow. I mean, you said nap. I also, yesterday was a Sunday. We're recording this on a Monday and we had beautiful weather. And I think I just took it so easy.
Yeah.
And still got some things done. So, yeah.
Well, and there's always going to be that stuff to get done. And, I was the guy who would work until 2 a.m. and do all that. And I think you do sometimes, right? But ultimately, I think prioritization plays a big part in it too.
Yeah.
I got prioritization amnesia, I think, a lot when I left the military. And now I'm just better at going, okay, you know what? This is what's going to get done. This is what isn't. This is what's important. And I'm not going to try and do the entire list at the expense of the things that are really important. Jobs are going to come and go. Opportunities are now, especially where the world is today, family, friends, all that stuff. And where I am, in age. Again, I don't know how close we are in age, but I'm at the age now where people do die suddenly. People do, things do happen, and you look and say, geez, is getting this next thing done that important, or should I go hang out and spend some time with the people and things that are really important?
Savoring the moments, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So in terms of savoring moments, what is your favorite childhood memory?
Wow. I have terrible memory, so I don't really have this was everything I think before high school is a blur. So I don't know that I've got a favorite memory. That's crazy to say, but, I think that I've been more shaped by my time at the academy. And not to say I didn't have great time with the family and things like that, but I think really for me, once I went through those gates at the academy, the rest was a prologue in some ways for who I've become. So I think that's a little bit different. I don't know. It's a good question.
That's a very interesting response. And I guess one other way you could phrase it is, are there certain triggers, like a smell or a sound that it just kind of reminds you of your childhood?
I think it's more a thread. I think it's a vibe. I think it's more like the difference between a snapshot and a video, right? Where the video has to have all the context. I don't think there are these moments. It was like, wow. And maybe it's because of gaining wisdom, right? Where I think when you're younger, you're more transactional. You could say it was getting this thing versus looking and saying, wow, I was really happy when, I look at the academy as an example and I'm like, wow, I was really happy then because it was simple, right? You didn't have the weight of a family and all these others. So for me, I think it tends to be sort of more like a current. And I think that's, again, looking back to say that it is a narrative. It's a story. It's like my son, right? When he said, it's not a point in time. It happened when it happened. And I think that's a big part of how I look at the past. I don't isolate. I think that it's too much of a thread to pick kind of one point.
It's incredibly fascinating, the way of looking at it.
Beads on a thread, right? I guess you could say all those happy things.
You're building the giant bracelet of life.
Yes.
Or necklace or,
yes.
I don't know, chain around the world, depending on how long your bracelet is.
Yes.
So what was one of the most challenging situations that you've ever faced in your career or in your life to date? And how did you overcome it?
I think that it was, and it's not the typical one, I think it was admitting that I wasn't cut out for the corporate life, right? Where I think it's now I look at it as a pivot, right? But when you're in the midst of, and I'll be honest, I weighed a lot more then because I was in the midst of depression because I was in the wrong thing. And I think it was a continual challenge of that. Like, I think the small challenges are always, they seem bigger than something like I'm articulating now. When we did our Kickstarter, we had 17 knives that got caught into like the postal system that we couldn't get. It was this crazy, crazy thing. And you would look and you would think from an entrepreneurial perspective, wow, that was a big challenge, right? Like you lost inventory, you lost the revenue on that. You were dealing with, I reached out to Congress people. I reached out to the post office. That was less of a challenge than waking up every day and putting on a face of this isn't what I'm made to do. And I think that was for me much harder than any individual obstacle.
I guess the existential ones are always the ones that weigh in heavy because they creep up on you and it's there, but you don't really want to react to it until it, sometimes something happens that drives you to.
And I think it's even harder if you are a successful person and you are performing because you're doing well enough to say, I'm not bad at it. And you see the people who are the top 10% and you're like, wow, like, why can't I do that? So it's almost talking like the ability curve, right? It's like that aspect of saying I'm not a failure by saying I'm not good enough at it that it's going to give me thing. And I think that's where a lot of people trip up. But it's a challenge to do that because it's a challenge to say that you're not good at something.
No, incredible. But in a way, the reframing, bringing back in the theme, looking at it from a different lens, all of a sudden gives you that clarity as well.
I think, and it's funny, I've got one story on that might be good. I wanted to be a banjo player for so long. Like I had a beautiful handmade banjo that I bought and I was just not good at it. And it was the same kind of thing. And for me, I crossed a bridge and I think it helped me understand my work thing as well. When I looked and said, I kept it around. I said, someday I'm going to pick that up and I'm going to practice and I'm going to be good at it. I just have to do the 10,000 hours thing. And I looked at it and I said, not only am I never going to be good at it, someone else will be. And this instrument deserves that and they deserve that. And I think that got me to an existential point to say, I'm not good at everything. And no amount of work will alter that. So acceptance is a much better way to do that. Now, can I find an instrument that maybe I'm good at? Yeah, if I really want to make music. And I think that challenge is hard for people, especially type A. I think there's other people who feel they fail at everything and it's the other side of the coin. But for me, it's always saying, I'm not good at this. I'm not going to do it.
And it sounds like me with tennis. I settled for badminton in the end.
Oh, really? No pickleball? Do they pickleball over there?
I haven't actually tried it. I'm sure there's probably a pickleball place.
Oh my God, it's like crazy here, the pickleball stuff.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, valuable advice. What other advice can you offer to, young professionals starting out?
What I would say is seek and accept help. That was when I talked about all the other endeavors I had. I mean, it's really funny because my wife and I were talking about this last night because she has a business that she wants to start. And I look at all the other endeavors and I was either a solopreneur or I was super convinced that my idea was great and I wasn't good at getting help. And what I would say is go actively seek help. You may find a co-founder out of it, but you will no doubt get benefit. And I have benefited from the generosity and wisdom and intelligence and lived experience of others. And I think you become a better leader when you think that way as well, because you realize that those other people's contributions are what makes the team work. You're there in the service of the organization and them, and the help that they're providing is valuable. And if you can kind of think in those two ways, up and down, that you will be immensely more successful than if you are so adamant that you have the right answer or that you can get to that right answer alone. That's been the big one for me. And it's not intuitive that would have been my challenge. But when I started doing that and not worrying about someone stealing my idea and all that. That was a level up. That was really when things were like, oh, okay, wow, I really dodged a bullet with this. When someone gives you good advice and all that, and I'd like to pay it forward. So anybody who ever, they can reach me. My digital footprint's pretty big, but really get out there and meet people. Because what you'll find when people say, oh, I want to network, that is networking. That's the valuable networking. But the other part about it is know what you want. Know how that help will be good. Building a team, right? I talked earlier about saying fill those holes the right way that interface well with you and the other players and support the endeavor. But especially if you're looking for someone external to give you help, their time is important, right? But they'll give it to you, but know what you're looking for. So take the time to do that. And I think there'll be a lot more successes than failures when people do that.
Thank you for the beautiful advice. I think it's so important that we have that openness and I guess that humbleness to go and ask, show the vulnerability and share ideas. Because ultimately an idea is just an idea unless it's acted upon. So, if an idea gets stolen, well, if they act upon it, well, good on them. That's at least the mindset I try to have as well.
Well, right. And sometimes that will bring the threads you don't think of, where someone will say, oh, I actually was working on something like this years ago. Like, you just don't know where that will get you. So, I keep kind of going back to what kind of species we are. That's the kind of species we are. We're social. We're good people generally. And I think when you give people the chance to help you, they will. And that's when it gets transformative, because then you feel a lot of gratefulness for that, but you feel the need to also pay that forward, and that becomes a good, virtuous cycle.
Oh, definitely. And so, Douglas, as we slowly draw to the end of this episode, the one existential question that I think my guests like to have fun with when I ask it is, what would you most like to be remembered for?
My knife, really. I said to someone one day that is my epitaph, right? Like, if 50 years from now, this is the standard, even if they didn't know that I invented it, I think that, right? You said being remembered for it. And I think on a certain level, and it speaks to that, is just having added value to more people, endeavors, and things than not. I think I heard said really eloquently once, something about the greatest thing is being able to plant trees that you'll never be able to enjoy the shade of. And I think that's sort of part of it, right? It's leaving things better, improving things. Money's great, but, whatever. No one's using, currencies from empires past because money's fleeting, but people remember inventions and are shaped by inventions that shape some of our innovation stuff today. And I would love to be part of that movement of humanity along further down our improvement.
And it, in a way, mirrors also what you learned in the army, which is leaving your team better than you found it.
Right.
Which I think this scales at every level, which is incredibly beautiful to hear.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's funny to hear it back sometimes because you're like, oh, wow. That was a great thought.
Well, I'm glad I could mirror it back to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Where can people find you if they want to get in touch?
DouglasMKatz.com is my personal page, and that's got everything I'm working on. They can always go to NULU.com or NULUKnives.com. So NULUKNIVES.com. That's our main site. Ton of information there, stuff about me. But also I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, all that. So anybody reach out on your platform of choice. I am now publishing my ADHD stuff under a Substack called The Children of Chaos. So any fellow people wired the way I am, or those who interact or love them, I am trying with that, actually trying to bring some Q&A component to it. So if people have questions about their wiring as seen through my perspective of my lived experience, I would love to help out with that. And then I think that should be enough ways they can find me that way.
Yeah, great list. And we'll definitely put those links as well as links to resources of the topics we've covered. And this is a really broad collection on today's show. But
yeah, no one's walking away from this show going, oh, I don't think that guy has that kind of wiring. So that, you got the full blast on that one.
But Douglas, I really appreciate the depth, the incredible stories you've told, and just your time in general for coming onto the show and for sharing your journey. I've certainly learned a lot.
Thank you so much. I think I enjoyed it more than you did. So I really, really appreciate the chance to talk to your listeners.
No, likewise, appreciate it. And listeners, if you made it this far, I hope you've taken away some incredible gems. I certainly have. But like I do with every guest, I always give my guests the final words. So, Douglas, one last message from you to the listeners to take away from today.
I think I'm going to stay with my humanity thing. I'm going to say, I think people really should take some time to think about whether they're being the best and adding the most value, and take some time, if you're not, to figure out a way that you can, because the returns are worth it.
Thank you very much. And that wraps up our incredible, honest, and important episode with Douglas Katz. For more insights on military-grade leadership, an expose of knives from different cultures, or just some resources on supercharging your own unique features, check out the show notes for more information over at tgcpodcast.show. And as always, thank you listeners for tuning in to this episode and for your feedback and support. If you are enjoying this show, I would be incredibly grateful if you could share this podcast with your family, friends, colleagues, and even fellow military veterans. Follow this podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, and other podcast channels to stay up to date with the latest releases, or be part of the conversation on Instagram at tgcpodcast_official or our LinkedIn group. If you're curious about me or my work in general, you can also check out my website or social media. Head to petermbach.com, my YouTube channel, Peter Marcus Bach, that's Marcus with a C, or Instagram at petermbach87. Give me some feedback or suggest a future guest so that I can keep improving this show. The podcast's intro and outro song is called Starsky by Alex Kieran. Stay tuned for our next episode and next guest to hear how they are tackling the grand challenges.